I'm Maya.
And I'm Bam, and today we'll be interviewing Nicky Singer about her amazing books.
So, on to the first question.
Who are you and what do you do for a living?
My name is Nicky Singer, and I'm a writer. My day job is as a novelist, but I've also written plays and opera.
What inspired you to be an author?
Well, there are sort of two answers to that. I think writers are born and also made. So as a young child, I won a bar of chocolate for a story I wrote about a giraffe when I was 6 years old. And I went, whoa, easy money. I'll be doing this again. So that's the first answer is chocolate. And the second answer is something rather more serious, which is I often think in a writer's life, there's a moment, and normally it's not a very pleasant moment, which sort of flips a switch, because all of us are storytellers, but why do some people want to write the stuff down? And for me, that was the death of my father when I was 14. And he died so suddenly and so unexpectedly that, in fact, the police thought he might have been poisoned. And there were all sorts of things that happened in our house, including police cars sitting outside our house. And for 3 days until the results of the autopsy came back to say that he hadn't been poisoned, he died of natural causes. But in those 3 days, the rug was pulled out from under my notion of what was true and beautiful and reliable. And what you can do in writing is you can't always make a happy ending for characters, but you can make your characters face stuff and then see how they pull through. Because writing's really about control.
Right then when you were talking, all that went through my mind was just literally that bar of chocolate going through.
Then you're a very positive person, you see, which is very good. You see, I'm a very negative person, so I'd have been thinking of all the death and poisoning.
But for your childhood dream, have you always wanted to be a writer?
Well, I didn't really know that you could be a writer, but I was always sort of doing it. And I also I'm one of 5 children, and I have 3 younger sisters. And after my father died, and my mother had to look after all these kids, and she had to put, the supper on at the same time as putting one to bed. I used to take, because I was one of the older children, I used to take the charge of putting the younger ones to bed. And I had a little story that I would develop with each of my younger sisters, telling them the stories. So I sort of always did it, but I didn't really know that you could do it as a job.
So you created the stories depending on their personality?
Yes, you're completely right about that. And so my next down sister is really insanely mad, and she had a whole raft of really weird, amazing, loud, extraordinary characters. And my next down sister from her is like really quiet and gentle, and she had some really nice little gentle rabbits. And my little sister was like too little really to know. She was only 9 months old when my father died, so we just did, lullaby sort of things.
Okay, so how did your family and friends react to you wanting to be an author and when you became an author?
I don't think anybody minded one way or the other.
They're just like, do whatever you want, at least you have a job.
Yeah, get a proper job. Well, no one becomes a writer and earns money from it straight away. I mean, even J.K. Rowling, sat in a cafe, poor as a church mouse, while she pretended to be a writer for a long time. So people think that you can be a writer and live, but actually you can't. So first of all, you get a day job, and then you write at night by candlelight, or whenever you're not doing the day job. So it's and then you're quite right, very sensible. And then you leave your full-time job to get a part-time job, so you've got a bit of security while you push the boat out. And then only when you're really, really brave or something really big happens in your life, do you go like, no, I'm going to do this every day of my life.
Well, what genre do you like about and why?
I'm very anti-genre because I'm generally anti-boxes of all sorts. So I don't, if you say, this is a dystopian novel, and you don't like dystopian novels, you might not try it. But there's dystopia and dystopia. And if you say, like I might like, I don't like romance, because romance is slushy and disgusting. But, there are romantic stories, Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is one of them, that's a romance. I think it limits what a story can be, and it limits who the audience for that might be. So I don't go with genres myself.
So it's just a wide variety of what you like.
Well, I'll tell you a story. One of my books, I don't have it with me now, is a book called Gem X. So I wrote this entire book, and when I handed it in to my publisher said, "So you've written some science fiction?" And I went like, "No, I haven't." And they went like, "Yes, you have. This is a book of science fiction." And I went like, "No, it's not." And then I read it, and I thought, well, maybe it is a book of science fiction. But I didn't really know that or think of that when I was writing it.
So, where do you get your inspiration from your books? For your books?
Inspiration comes from many different quarters. So sometimes you might have a big idea, like I knew I always wanted to write about climate change, but I didn't know how to do that because it's like too big and too scary, and how do you get that down into a couple of characters? I didn't really know until I fell upon a story that somebody told me one day about these opening graves in an island called Herschel off the north coast of the Yukon, and that was the sort of inspiration for this book. But unless somebody had told me the story, I wouldn't have known that. But it's sort of being alert to possibilities. People often say, well, you must have lived like a really interesting life to have all these things happen and you can make books out of them. But nothing more interesting has happened to me than has happened to you. It's just that I'm always got my antenna up going, oh, that can make a good story. Oh, I'll have that. And sometimes it's things that you bump into in different ways. So there was a moment when I was thinking about writing my first book for young people, because I'd written for adults before then. And I went for a long walk by the sea where I live in Brighton. And as I turned to go home, I came past this huge derelict house, and I thought, oh, just before I go home, I'll go in this huge derelict house. Don't try this at home. There's a law against it. It's called trespass. And anyway, it's very stupid going in huge derelict houses because you never know what you might find there. But anyway, I went in and I went to the top of the house, and it scared me witless. And when I got to the top of the house, I opened this door and my heart was really thumping, and I looked in this room. There was like nothing in this room, and I thought, I can't have gone all the way up this house and into this room and there'd be nothing in this room. So I had what writers called a moment of the what if. So I looked at the room and I thought, what if something did happen in this room many years ago, but it still has resonances? So that story, which became Feather Boy, happened because I accidentally wandered into an abandoned house. And
Did you like to read when you were young? What was your favorite book and author?
I did like to read when I was young. And the first book I ever read, I memorized. It was called Anton B. And I remember I was 4 years old, and I went out, and my father used to like to mend cars, and he was lying underneath a car, and I went out and recited, A is for ant, and B is for bee, and they lived in a sea cup. You see, I can remember it even now. And he lay under the car doing whatever he was doing, deeply unimpressed. So that was my first reading experience. And then I read all sorts of stuff that people sneer at now. Like I read lots of Enid Blyton. Everything I know about plot and pace I learnt from Enid Blyton. And what was really useful for me is nobody told me what to read. Nobody went, you can only read this, or even you should read this. But my home was full of books, so I just pulled books off the shelves and read whatever I wanted to.
How long does it take to write a book, and what is your process?
Well, it takes me about 18 months, but it takes other authors any time. So a book might take some author 10 years, and Anthony Horowitz manages to write books in 6 weeks, I've heard.
Well, because he's like, whoa, this is good. This is good. Right. Whoa, this is amazing. I shall publish it. Yes, it's published. It's now amazing.
Yes.
Famous.
I think he is a bit like that, yes. But you said that, not me. But for me, it's a matter of, finding the idea, and then doing a lot of research about the idea and thinking about the idea. So for about 6 months, you wouldn't notice that I'm working. Well, my husband notices I'm working because I go to my desk every day, but you wouldn't, or I might wander about, because there are different sorts of research you can do. You can research by reading books, you can research by thinking, and you can research, some of the research I do is, if I'm writing like this book, it starts in the Sudan and it ends up in Scotland. So I went to the Sudan and I lay in the desert under an umbrella of stars and felt what that felt like. And then I went to Scotland and tried to cross a border without using a road. And so you don't make anything up. I just like to copy it out in real life.
Does writing energize you or exhaust you more?
A bit of both, because of course there are days when it goes well and days when it goes very badly indeed. So of course the nicest feeling of all is sometimes when you start a book and you're researching it and you don't know if it's any good or not. And I know when it's beginning to gel, when it'll be a real book, when excuse me, when everything that people say and everything you hear and everything that happens seems to feed into the book, and you go like, oh, I'll have that, and that, and what did you say again? And you start being like this giant sponge and draw everything in, and everything seems to be relevant to the story, and that's incredibly exciting. And then there are the other days where you go like, oh, this is a pile of rubbish, I don't even know why I wrote this, this isn't working, this is really depressing, I'm going to go and throw myself off a cliff, and obviously that's not such a good day. So you get a bit of both.
So, what do you think makes a good book?
I think everybody would probably have a different answer to what makes a good book. For me, it's always located in emotion. Do I care about the people? Do I understand why they feel the way that they do feel? Do I watch them go on a journey where they can make me laugh and cry, and I feel like I'm on that same journey myself? I want to be taken somewhere I haven't been before and learned something I didn't know, either about the inside of somebody's head, or sometimes, you know, language can be really beautiful. Sometimes you can go to a place that you've never been to geographically, but for me, it's all located in that emotion. Do I care? Is this story moving me?
Who's your favorite book and author?
That's a difficult question because I think it changes as you change. So there was a book I read when I was about 16 called To the Lighthouse by an author called Virginia Woolf, and I thought, wow, this is an absolutely amazing book. And then I read it again when I was about 26, and I went like, what on earth is this book about? You know, this is not the same book that I read when I was 16. And then I realized, oh, hang on, it must be the same book, but clearly I've changed. So I think you change, and then what you like changes. There's one book I read or reread about every 5 years called Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which is a really shocking, great love story about the sexiest man in English literature called Heathcliff. You won't have read about him, but you will one day. He's incredible. Anyway, so I love that book. But otherwise, every year I read some other book that speaks to me now.
So technically, like, when you were a child, you used to really like this book. Like how we used to like Bob the Builder as a book, and now we don't because we think, wait, it's really like common sense back then.
Well, no, Bob the Builder, you could still as an adult look back on Bob the Builder going, wow, was that a sensational book? and that's actually why parents read to their children books that were meaningful to them when they were children. That's why some books, some classics go on and on and on, because I don't know, you know, what sort of books. What books do you remember from your own childhood?
Peppa Pig.
Peppa Pig.
Peppa Pig's like the first thing that comes into my mind, being my favorite.
Horrid Henry.
Horrid Henry. And when you got a bit older, what are the books that have been meaningful for you?
Percy Jackson.
More of the scary books.
Scary books, such as?
Sometimes Goosebumps.
Yeah, Goosebumps is
They're really
one of my favorites.
Yeah. All right, well, maybe when you get older and have children of your own, you'll read those books to your children. but I hope not.
They might be into
At least not the
different-
Goosebumps ones. The Horrid Henry ones, they're pretty good.
Oh, what book are you most proud of?
What, the ones I've written, you mean?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Have you got brothers or sisters?
Yes.
It's like asking your mum, which of your children are you most proud of? She's going to find it difficult to answer, isn't she?
Mom's gonna be like, neither.
Including you? Yes. So
But-
sassy. I know.
But it's a weird thing that when you write a book, you have to be so involved in that book. It is sort of like a child. And with different books, I've had different experiences. And some, in a way, have had a bigger life than others have. Like my first book, Feather Boy, was made into a film, and then I've rewritten it as a musical. So I've had a lot of fun with that book, more so than some of my other books, which have only been books. So, but not proud so much. I'd like to be proud of them all.
Your mind
Thinks hard. Yeah, I'm very proud of all my children. Yes, I am.
What other authors are you friends with, and how do they help you become a better writer?
Okay, well, near where I live in Brighton, which is at the bottom of the triangle, there's another town called Lewis, also at the bottom of the triangle, about 8 miles away. And I was doing a radio interview actually with this man who I didn't know, who was an author, and we, had coffee afterwards. And he said, "Do you want to come? There's a group of writers we meet, every month in a pub in Lewis. Do you want to come?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, I'll come." A pub. Do you know what a pub is? So
Yes.
we have pubs here. Okay. So we go and we have a chat, and it turns out that all the rest of them are picture book writers. I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't even know what I'm doing here. This is ridiculous. I don't even write picture books. And some of them are illustrators and some of them are writers and whatever. I'm totally out of my comfort zone. But actually, I really like the people. And some of them write middle grade, which is most of mine, other than Feather Boy, are more, teen YA books. And anyway, so I stay and have a glass of wine. I'm driving, so I have a cup of tea actually. So I have a cup of tea and we have a chat, and then I go back the next month, and I've been going and meeting them for about, I don't know how long now, a long time. And it's really amazing. You probably heard, I don't know if you have some of their books in the library, but it's a writer called Alan Durrant, and a woman who writes myths called Dawn Casey, and a guy called Guy Parker Rees, who wrote a wonderful book called Girafes Don't Dance. Where's my librarian? Is she here? Girafes Don't Dance. He wrote that book. And we talk. We don't chat, actually. We talk about our work. And you'd think that picture books are really easy books to write because they don't have many words in them. But actually, picture books are profoundly difficult to write. And when you talk about writing with other writers, you learn a huge amount. So it's been an absolute privilege to be in that group with them.
Okay, so did you ever expect to be this successful as a writer? If so, why? If not, why? If not, why not?
Well, that question assumes that you think I'm successful, and then you'd have to ask yourself the question, what is success? Because all these things aren't as easy as you imagine. So we have a program in my little triangle where I live called Desert Island Discs, and they interview you and ask you about your life, and then they play music in all the bad bits. So you say, "My life is marvelous and I'm fantastic." Music. "My life is marvelous and I'm fantastic." Music. "My life is marvelous and I'm fantastic." Music. And life really isn't like that. So if you do that version of my life, I've written a play for the National Theatre in England. I've written opera for Glyndebourne, for two of the most prestigious houses in my home country. I've published novels. I've won prizes. I went down the red carpet to receive a BAFTA for I didn't, my producer and I did, and my director for the television version of Feather Boy. So, my life looks pretty glittery and successful. But, my life is also sitting at a desk in total silence for 7 hours a day, feeling a failure.
Wow, that's
That's depressing.
What was your biggest challenge?
What is my biggest challenge? I don't know. Earning enough money from the thing I passionately want to do to be able to live, I suppose.
Sun around your head. Cue the music.
So, what has been your most successful moment?
I think you just explained that.
Well, yes, but there are two answers to that. So in the Desert Island Discs version, it would be walking down the red carpet and going up on stage and receiving, the BAFTA is like the equivalent of what we have in England, like they have the Oscars in America. So you go up and you get this big sort of, what do you call it, gold mask thing, only we got it for best film. And because best film is like the last category, and the way they do the awards is they sit you around the table for hours and hours and hours and don't give you any food till the end of the awards ceremony. So you're sitting there, you're drinking because they keep filling up your glass, and like, so you go through all the smaller awards and all of this and all of that and all the rest, and then finally you get to best film, and then you win it, and you've had about a bottle and a half of wine by now, and you have a stagger up onto the stage.
Did you actually do that? Did that
That's
happen?
nothing to say because they could put you in the monk.
So did that happen? Did that happen to you?
I fell over a flex on my way up to the stage.
What's a flex?
A flex is like a cord from, you know, an old,
Oh.
like an electricity flex. They have lots of those for the cameras and the lights and the action. So you could say that was my most successful moment. But sometimes I think success, real success for a writer is when somebody who's read your book writes you a personal letter. Somebody you don't know from a bar of soap writes you a letter and says, thank you for that book, that changed my life, or thank you for that book, that describes my life, or thank you for that book, I didn't know I felt the way I did until I read that book. And sometimes those letters are more meaningful than all the literary stuff.
What is the easiest and hardest aspect of writing?
I'm not sure that anything is easy. There's no part of the process that's easy, although the more you do it, the more you learn what works for you. So for instance, I have this notebook. These are the only notebooks I write in. When this company goes out of business, my career is finished. Because I've written in notebooks like this. I mean, this is my notebook just, you know, to come here to the school. So this isn't a creative notebook, but if this was one of my creative notebooks, it would go like this. On this side of the page, if I'm doing research, on this side of the page, I write down all the research I'm doing. Page this, it said this, page this. And on this side, this blank page, I write all my creative thoughts. Oh, what if the character thought about this? Or, oh, that reminds me of that. So it's like a little, I tell you once actually, for Ireland, I've lost the thread of the question, but I'm finding this interesting. For Ireland, somebody asked for my notebooks because they wanted to see how I'd written it. And so I had to put my notebooks in a parcel and send them to a museum. And then they put my notebooks in a glass case like they were Cinderella. And then they had to fill out an insurance document that said how much my notebooks were worth. And I said, well, they're either worth £1 million or they're worth nothing. Or you can't put a price on them. Because to me, that's like my whole life and soul is in that notebook. And if you lose it, I'm going to come and chop your legs off.
Slowly brings a knife just to chop your legs.
I've forgotten what the question was. I'm sure it was interesting.
What is the easiest and hardest aspect of
okay,
writing?
so
Yeah.
that was that hard or easy? I can't even remember why I was saying that. So what's hard? Well, everything's sort of hard. It's hard when it's going badly and you still have to go to your desk every day and you don't know if it's any good. That's the hardest stuff.
So, why do you continue to write?
Because it's like breathing for a writer. If you don't do it, you die a little.
What films or TV series are your favorite?
Actually, I don't really watch a lot of TV.
Do you have Netflix at least?
That is so funny you should ask that because this book has just been sold for film. And when I went to see my film agent, he said, "This is a really filmic book." He said, "Have you ever thought about writing for telly?" And I said, "No." I said, "There's nothing interesting on the telly." And he looked at me and he said, "Do you have Netflix?" And I went, "No."
I don't have Netflix either, it's fine.
And he went, "Well, you should get it." So I asked my older son, did he have Netflix? And he said yes. So he added me to his account. And I did find television to be revolutionized, you're right.
So, do you have any plans for your future books and any TV or films adaptations of your work?
Well, as I say, this one's just been sold for film. But whether it'll be a film, we don't know, because lots of books are sold for film. They never actually get made into films because people have to go away and raise money and, you know, make it all happen. And sometimes it's tricky, but I hope it will be a film.
So, what tips, advice would you have for future writers?
Listen. It's quite extraordinary what people say, and it's quite extraordinary what they don't say. So the job of a writer is to listen to what people actually say, you know, with their mouth. But people say things with a lot of other things other than their mouth, not just their body language. Some of the most interesting things are in the gaps between what people say. And you need to listen to what people aren't saying. And you need to also to be really nosy and ask a lot of questions and never take no for an answer.
If you were not a writer, what would you be?
Dictator.
So
I've
powerful.
always wanted to be a dictator. Yeah. It's a different sort of control. I'm obviously into control. And I think that would be a good job.
Manipulative.
Extra question.
Extra, that's not unfair.
Did you draw the book covers yourself? Or
Ah.
did someone draw them for you?
Well, actually, you don't, as an author, unless you're obviously an illustrator, have any say-so at all over the covers of your book. It's quite extraordinary. They send you the cover. In the old days, before computers, they used to send you the cover of your book inside a brown paper envelope. And I always used to go to the loo with the brown paper envelope and open it in the loo because it was always going to be, "Oh, that's really horrible, I hate it." And I didn't want anyone ever to see my reaction to it. So I needed to stay with it for a bit to see if I really liked it or not. But that was a horrible, horrible moment. But now they send you it, obviously, by email, and you look at it and you can actually say, "Well, I like this bit and I don't like this bit," and they can tweak it a lot more. But generally speaking, you don't have any power over it. But this is an illustration by a guy called Chris Riddell, who's a British writer and illustrator and also a political cartoonist. And how this came to happen was quite strange because this wasn't originally a novel, it was originally a play. And I rewrote it as a book, and I was having one of my despondent moments because I didn't know if it was any good as a book. It seemed much flabbier than the play. So I was sitting being upset in a cafe, a bookshop cafe in Brighton, and this guy starts scribbling on the walls, and somebody should take that man away. You know, he's a vandal. Why are they letting him scribble on the walls? And then I looked at the picture he was drawing, and it was quite good. And I thought, oh, it's quite a nice picture he's drawing, really. Anyway, he turned out to be this bloke, and he had a job. He'd just been made something in England called Children's Laureate, which meant he's responsible for getting kids to read, and he has a job for 2 years going around talking about this and that. And the guy who owned the bookshop had said he could draw on the walls of any of his branches for those 2 years. And we fell into conversation, and basically he offered to illustrate the book, and I was like, woo! And so this is his cover, and inside are 20 other illustrations he made for the book.
It's so nice.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been absolutely delightful. You have composed many and wonderful questions. Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and remember,
If we didn't film it,
it didn't happen!